Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed your lunch, although it was a little bit rushed, but I'm sure that you all enjoyed it. And our virtual guests, I hope you also had some lunch. I'm just quickly going to introduce myself. I'm Henriette Swart. I'm Director of the Branch Libraries of the Stellenbosch University Library and Information Service. There are 5 branch libraries and I oversee that. So we are in for a very interesting session this afternoon. We're now at session 2, where we will deal with the agility of academic libraries and the future of work. So we're first going to have two speakers, one virtual and one in person. Then we'll have a tea break, and then we'll have the next 2 speakers. Now, the first 2 speakers will deal with the topic of agility of academic libraries. Now, I don't know if you know what the exact meaning of agility is. It's normally a term that they use for sports, but agility, the definition is the ability to move quickly and easily. But not only move easily and quickly, but also think easily and quickly. And I think that is what is expected of us in person nowadays. We all had to adapt and to be agile. Then we were at home and then we were back at work, but also libraries. And we're going to hear about that this afternoon, how libraries adapted to this COVID situation. And then after this first 2 speakers, we will have a session on looking into the glass ball. What is going to be the future of our work? Will we still have libraries? Will we still be librarians after this? So I'm fascinated by what the speakers are going to say. So I think we should jump in immediately, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and she is Professor Lisa Janicke Hinchliffe. She is Professor and Coordinator for Information Literacy Services and Instruction at the University Library of Illinois and Urbana-Champaign in the USA. And her topic will be academic libraries and institutional resilience, which is also a wonderful word to unpack, reflections on the long 2020. So welcome, Professor Hinchliffe, and over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Good morning, everyone from Central Illinois, where it is not even the beginning of the workday yet. Let me go ahead and find my presentation here. Okay, wonderful. The system is really slick. Okay, so as I was just introduced, I'm Lisa Janicke Hinchliffe, and I'm a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where in the university library, I serve as the coordinator for information literacy services and instruction. I also have affiliate appointments in the School of Information Sciences, which is our library school here, as well as the Center for Global Studies. My topic chosen here today, I think particularly stems out of work I did last summer or early spring in 2020, looking at how academic libraries were responding to the pandemic pivot. And I'll be using this word pivot multiple times probably today, because I really see it as a way in which we changed our practice quite quickly, but in reality, we're continuing to change our practice right now. So I also am using this term, the long 2020, as a way of sort of signaling the kinds of ways that historians will eventually characterize this time. They often use this phrase to discuss a particular moment in time, but they discuss it from sort of bracketing kind of a before and after and kind of thinking of time in the middle as significant or pivotal, but recognizing that it doesn't have firm boundaries that apply to just the diary that we might have for a given year. So the fact that I'm coming to you, of course, from Central Illinois at my dining room table is exactly the kind of pivoting and resilience that we are all working with these days. So though I've had the chance to visit Stellenbosch previously, and I look forward to doing so again. So in addition to my topic, which is a more hopeful one, I can't help but take note of the kinds of sort of memes and funny sayings that we see going around the internet that help us understand our collective place that we are in today. And this one, I think, for me and for many of my colleagues, really resonated with the kinds of challenges that we're facing, which is we are no longer a night owl or an early bird. We are some form of permanently exhausted pigeon, where we just feel like we're pecking and pecking and pecking about and gathering and doing so many things, but the purposefulness of it is a little escaping us at the moment. And we also saw a number of these sorts of memes going around the internet. And some of these are very culturally encoded, like the Grover, the character from Sesame Street. Others are hopefully a little bit more universal, which is like the sheep scale. But I sometimes use these in the class I teach in the library school on library evaluation and program assessment to get a sense of how students are doing at a given point in the semester, of how are they feeling? You know, are they feeling super Grover today, or are they feeling like that sheep with the bucket over their head? And these are just ways that we have used to articulate something that is very intangible for us, which is the overall sense of how we're doing at any given point in time and trying to communicate that. So, you know, what are those days when we are feeling like, you know, Grover number 2, super Grover, or we're feeling like a spring in our step, or a celebratory like sheep 6 or 9? Part of the reason that we feel this way is that library workers always feel this great sense of obligation to our organizations and to our institutions. I was reminded of this recruitment poster from the American Library Association from many decades ago, in which they put forth that library work is the profession upon which all other professions and occupations depend. No pressure there. And it talks about how library serves the teacher, the minister, the doctor, lawyer, engineer, merchant, artisan, social worker, student, and homemaker. Obviously, this is both the public and the academic libraries. And we offer culture, information, and recreation. Library work puts the librarian in touch with every human interest. And I truly believe that this is the case. Information, especially in our knowledge society, is a critical source of support for all of the professions, all of the workers, all of our society, and certainly for civic engagement as we grapple with some of the political and mis and disinformation kinds of effects that we're seeing in our contemporary society. Nonetheless, this puts a rather lot of pressure on library workers. We see Fabazi Attar's work in the United States around the concept of vocational awe, where library workers feel that they also can't get out from under sort of this idealized notion of what it means to be a library worker and to love our work, and be unable to kind of also accept that there's problems with it. But this is in part what is both the source of our stress and our resilience, because we do have for a long time this mental model or structure. Those of you who know my work know that I was president of the Association of College and Research Libraries here in the United States in 2010, 2011. And that is the time in which we kicked off our value of academic libraries work within the association with the publication of this book, which is freely available at the ACRL website. The Value of Academic Libraries, a comprehensive research review and report, attempted to respond to, you know, even a pre-pandemic need for academic libraries to articulate what they contribute to their institutions and how they serve their institutional mission. The touchstone quote for this report, and really personally for my own work, since I've read this article, comes from Sarah Pritchard's Defining Quality in Academic Libraries, published in Library Trends in 1996. In this article, she has this quote, which I believe is really a touchstone for what we do. Few libraries exist in a vacuum, accountable only to themselves. There is always a larger context for assessing library quality. That is, what and how well does the library contribute to achieving the overall goals of the parent constituencies? So we need to be institutionally oriented in our work, focused on the goals of our institution, the mission of our larger organization. This can be a challenge for us at times, as we may not always have clear communication about what that mission is. And it may sometimes cause us to have to focus our energies in ways others than we might choose to. But what we know is that in this time of the pandemic, our institutions faced really existential, if you will, threats to their existence. And so figuring out how the library was going to serve with that was a crucial role. We saw headlines like this: can higher education survive the pandemic? As early as June of 2020. And you see, this is the opening quote from this article. There is no question that higher education is going to be gutted by the coronavirus. Now, when your industry is predicted to be gutted, you can imagine that institutional leaders are paying attention and are thinking a lot about what they can do to prevent their institution from making this line come true. And so we saw libraries as well quickly orienting themselves to this kind of work, to supporting their institutions, their faculties, their students, etc. Now, it's very easy to talk about those things that we didn't do well or that we weren't prepared to do or the like. But I personally believe that that is not the way to organizational strength and to moving the library to the central role that it indeed has played during this pandemic time. Institutions may be unaware of the degree to which that the library was a critical part of its institutional resilience, of the possibilities for faculty and students to continue to do their work in spite of great disruption and displacement. This theory of appreciative inquiry has been articulated for a couple of decades now as an organizational development theory. And so when you see AI on my slides here today, it is not artificial intelligence, but rather appreciative inquiry. At its heart, appreciative inquiry is about the search for what is best in people, their organizations, and it is a strengths-filled, opportunity-rich world around them. Appreciative inquiry is a fundamental shift in our perspective taken through the entire change process to see our organizations as a whole and as a human system, and to look into the strengths, possibilities, and successes of that institution. Academic libraries made programmatic changes, adopted new pedagogical practices, leveraged their long-standing virtual capacities, and responded to dynamic information environment to support student learning, faculty research, and institutional success during the time of the pandemic. We have a lot to be proud of during this time, especially since there was little time to plan and there's been almost no time for reflection. Our successes during this time have been tremendous, and our contributions to institutional resilience should really be a source of great strength for us moving forward. If we can tell that story and help our organizations continue to move in that direction. Appreciative inquiry basics here, just 4 points, is it focuses on an organization's core strengths rather than seeking to overcome or minimize its weaknesses. So by focusing on our strengths, we are able to move forward in spite of whatever those weaknesses are. Appreciative inquiry also comes with the principle that organizations move in the direction of what they study. So what we pay attention to is what we're drawn to, is where we put our effort, is where we grow. And so it makes a conscious choice to study what is best so that we move in the direction of what is best. And then this final note that it is not a top-down or bottom-up process, but rather a whole system approach to looking at our organization. Now, there are 5 key principles in appreciative inquiry. I won't be able to obviously go into all of them today, but there are 5, and I want us to look at just 3 of them. in our reflection here today. The constructivist principle is the principle that words create worlds. Reality is constructed through our language and conversations, through storytelling. The things that we tell about ourselves are the things that we create a world, both for ourselves as well as for our administrators, those who might invest in us, our faculty, and our students. The simultaneous principle, which is that inquiry creates change. That if we ask questions about our organization begins to develop, change over time. And the poetic principle, that we actually have the choice to choose what we study. So we can choose where we're asking our questions and what we're focusing on. And in doing so, it's going to describe and create that world that we know. So another author who's been very influential in my career is Stephen Brookfield. He has a book called Becoming a Critically Reflective Practitioner. It's aimed at folks who are involved in the education, in direct education of students in higher education. But I think it's actually abstractable and applicable to all of really library work and the like, anywhere in higher education. He says that we can tell our story as teachers and educators through 4 different lenses. The lens of our autobiography, of what has happened to us and what we are hoping to achieve as individuals. Through the lens of our students' eyes, understanding the impact of our choices and our programs on students is a mechanism for understanding our last year or the long 2020. We also can look at time and these things through our colleagues' experiences. That's the parallel kind of to looking at our own autobiography, is to look at the biographies of others and their experiences. And then of course, the theoretical literature, which is a place that crystallizes and distills and makes possible to have more generalized knowledge as well as knowledge over time. So the space and place that I think we have here today and other kinds of events like this is the gift of time and attention to write our story, to use words to create worlds that explain what happened in 2020 and how the library was situated to tell a narrative of the role of the library. So we each have a story to tell. And by each here, I mean both individually as well as our organizations, our libraries. And in that story, one of the questions we should ask ourselves is the library a victim of 2020? Is it a hero in 2020? Is it a helper? How do we talk about the library and how do we talk about ourselves during this time as a mechanism for creating a world that helps us understand the role of the library? Libraries are indeed under great stress and strain right now. I don't dismiss that at all. But nonetheless, we have a chance to tell a story about how the library was part of what made the fabric of our institutions strong, resilient. We are the weft relative to the weave, if you will. So what is the story of our library? I already mentioned that in 2020, early 2020, I had an opportunity to be part of what turned out to be a very significant project, not something that I anticipated as we created it one day in March 2020, but Christine Wolf-Eisenberg and I one day saw that libraries were casting about. What are other libraries doing? Looking for that information about how they were responding to this pandemic pivot. And within 24 hours, we had fielded a survey that turned out to be highly influential, including it was adapted for a number of other countries as well. I've given you the landing page, which is tinyurl.com/COVID library, if you'd like to see the long list of resources we developed over a short period of time. Most important was a live results dashboard. Any person could at any point go to a dashboard and see all the data that had been entered up to that moment in time. When we've given a talk about this, somebody commended us and said, oh, this is actually what open science looks like, is to do your work in the open so that people can see what's happening. Now, we didn't set out to do an open science project, but I think that was very insightful, that this really does represent those principles. We also wrote analyses in March of 2020. We wrote a 24-hour analysis, what we learned in the first day of the survey, a 48-hour, and a 10-day. And then we wrote in fall of 2020 about what did the new normal look like? How were libraries actually pivoting back, if you will, a little bit? The conclusion of our study and what we took away from all of the dialogue and opportunities to discuss this data is that academic libraries were well positioned to serve the needs of faculty, staff, and students who were working remotely and/or online. This is an amazing story, that we were well positioned, not perfectly positioned. We didn't get everything right, but overall, academic libraries were better able to continue to serve their institutions than almost any organization on campus. Now, it's a little bit much to put a tweet of your own into a talk, but I'm going to here because I think part of what's important is to recognize this is something I said in March of 2020, not just something I'm saying right now, which is this is the message. Academic libraries have been building up a parallel digital services content and infrastructure for 2 decades. We are not moving online from in person. We are online. We are just suspending in person for now. So the point being is that we already had a digital library. We had digital services. We didn't have to invent them for the pandemic because we were already recognizing that people are always remote from the library. Just sometimes they come in. And so we were already thinking in this way where we were able to more quickly respond, continue our services, continue access to our resources, not perfectly, but very strongly in ways that allowed our institutions to continue their work. So the other question we can ask is, what story will we tell going forward? So for yourself, I can't answer this. I can only give you a minute or two here to think through this. What went well this past year at your own library? What is the story you can tell of what went well? And for you personally, in this time of great challenge, crisis, stress, what brought out your best work? Because you did some of the best work of your life probably during this pandemic. It was under incredibly trying circumstances, but what enabled you to do your best work? And how did you bring out the best work in others? These questions aren't to suggest that we did our best work every day, that we always brought out the best in others. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on what is best, on where are our strengths individually and organizationally, so we can move in the direction of those strengths and further capitalize on them, serve as a foundation for continuing to grow the institutional resilience as well as our own library's resilience. So what story will we write into the future of our libraries, into our future as individuals? Now, I heard later on today, we're going to even ask this question of, will libraries exist into the future? I believe they will, because I've seen time and time again in my short career, and then looking back historically, that libraries are able to write a story about their role in the growth, development, and importance of their communities that they serve, whether they are a geographical, like those in a public library, or if they are institutional, like those of us who work in schools and universities. So we have an opportunity to ask ourselves, what will we do next as we continue to live in the long 2020? How will we find our positive core, that which is best about ourselves and our organizations? and how together can we find and tell our story. I want to express my gratitude to today's organizers who themselves have overcome great challenges and shown great resilience in putting on today's event and all that has been involved. I think they can think about many things that are at their positive core as an organization that can also give us inspiration of what that might be for ourselves. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you here today. I'm looking forward to the other talks in this session, and I look forward to the question and answer period.